opportunities for and challenges to faith in post-modernity. Let's start with the early church fathers. So we are in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century. As we know, they had a particular language. They spoke the conceptual language of their cultural environment. So they used the metaphors, stories, literature, philosophy, mythology of that culture. And in this way, they were able to introduce the newness of Christianity. We call this principle, we call it logoi spermatikoi, which can be translated as a germinal, seed-like, or seminal principles, which means every culture includes some seeds of the truth. And this is the case because God created them and God put some truth into each culture. Now, our job is to find these seeds and eventually nourish them in a way that they will start blossoming. What about our time? We are in the time of post-modernity. We have a huge shift now because the individual is in the center of the universe. And this can give us some advantages. So let's talk about the assets for our faith. And in my presentation today, I claim that there are 3. The first one is our time, post-modernity, encourages us to have a personally chosen faith. The second one is we are challenged to expand or renew our image, our imagining of God. And the third, post-modernity highlights that our faith must be free, so somehow I choose it out of my freedom, and at the same time freeing us. Now let me explain this a little bit more. Let's start with modernity. So this is the period between 17th century up to approximately the Second World War. So this is the period when the critical reason was in foreground, like the main characteristic of this period. Consequently, truth should be based on reasoning alone, supported by empirical data, theories, experiments. There was a kind of belief, a kind of hope that we should reorganize our society in a way that relatively soon it will become like a small heaven on earth. And consequently, we live more in the future, hoping, waiting, and much less referring to our past. Immanuel Kant made a new emphasis. He says, I, as a human rational being, I'm able to discover, introduce, and apply by myself moral laws and principles on the universal level, not only for me, for my society, but for the entire world. As we know, society and economy became very much concerned with production, expansion, growth, setting aside questions regarding consequences. What about religion in this time? It became obsolete, lacking scientific rigor and experimentation. So we have a couple of big names here like Durkheim, Nietzsche, Marx, Freud. Each one of them, in a certain way, wanted to reorganize our way of thinking and replacing religion and traditional values with their way of thinking. So the foremost question became what and how, and much less why. If this is modernity, let's jump now into post-modernity. This is now our time. The grand narratives of modernity, as I just told you, where everything was based on science, freedom, critical thinking, nowadays does not provide sufficient answers. At the same time, we lost the capacity of wondering, as Aristotle understood that. So for Aristotle, wondering is a kind of contemplation in terms of opening the eyes of our soul, opening in a way that we are able to gaze upon divine and eternal truth. Postmodern man struggles to do that. And at the same time, postmodern man is somehow, or likes to refer on skepticism, subjectivism, relativism. There is a kind of suspicion in human reason. Everything, the truth of course, should be somehow contingent upon cultural, political, religious, historical frames, which means if I change my frames, I need to change my understanding as well. Reality became a kind of conceptual construct, an artifact of scientific practice and language. There is no objective truth and knowledge, no absolute moral value. Big narratives, meta-narratives of human development are unhealthy. By this I mean, I cannot provide them because if I do that, then the whole universe somehow should follow them, but we don't want that because this would assume a kind of conformity. The big promise of the Enlightenment, that science and technology will save us, collapsed as well, especially after the experience of 2 world wars. So what remains is this individual somewhere, somehow in the center, but struggling, because he somehow refers to criticism on one side, and on the other side, he would like to be engaged in his society, and he's trying to improve the social conditions. His spirituality somehow includes new self-consciousness, self-awareness, which is based on self-referentiality, personal conviction, deeper motivation, and a more holistic way of knowing, which will somehow include emotions and past experiences as well. Now, the challenge is it's very hard to sustain this position. Why? Because big frames, big narratives, external structures are not welcome anymore. Charles Taylor, at this point, he's a Canadian philosopher, he would say that nowadays in post-modernity, both the atheist and theist, so believer and non-believer, struggle to argue or justify their position, because neither of them can give such a reasonable or enlightened account that would convince the opposite side. Now, let's go a little bit further. Let's say that we live in a secular age. What do we mean by secular age? The first one is the following. In modernity, there was a kind of unspoken assumption: the more of modernity, the less of religion. This doesn't count anymore, because the world remained religious now as it was ever before. Even more, there is a certain resurgence of more traditional religious positions. I mean, we can easily talk about Pentecostalism, or if you wish, of Islam, which are somehow growing, expanding. If before God was in the center of human existence on every step, either in my polis, society, kingdom, church, now the center of everything becomes the individual. And the individual is continuously looking for fullness of his life, but in a kind of exclusive way. He's happy, willing to explore everything, but somehow struggles to explore the position of religion, especially traditional religion. For this reason, we call this position exclusive humanism. So as humanists, we emphasize the importance of the well-being of humans, but at the same time, people struggle to refer to the transcendent. So everything somehow should be depending on human, and there is no space for God's help or grace. In other words, human flourishing makes no reference to something higher which humans should reverence, love, or acknowledge. We live in a kind of therapeutic age as well. In our time, there is a growing interest of the importance of therapy. And here I would like to refer to a very interesting book written by Philip Reeve, in 1966, so we talk about more than 50, 60 years ago, the triumph of the therapeutic uses of faith after Freud. This gentleman, Philip Reeve, claims that there are three types of men. The first one is religious man, who somehow refers to religion and finds meaning, fulfillment, flourishment in religion. After him, with capitalism, if you wish, with Marx, we can talk about economic man, who does the same, but this time he finds fulfillment in economy, in business, in material things. And after economic man, we have psychological man. Let's talk about him for a second. Psychological man lives in an environment where there are no social commitments. Somehow he feels relieved from social expectations, or there are no requirements. So society somehow should not define me, who I am. Since he's putting aside these external constructions, if we can call them so, he's putting aside also salvation. So suddenly there is no salvation, there is no structure of belief. Somehow everything is left to the individual. Now, please keep in mind, this was written in 1966. Consequently, this individual goes to a therapist, and this therapist is not supposed to give any judgment or evaluation of what this individual is going through. The therapist is simply supposed to be there and listen to the client, to his inner human instincts, which are coming out from the client on his journey to freedom. So here and there, the client might refer to compassion, forgiveness, prayer, meditation, self-reflection, rituals, or these are nice buzzwords, which might be taken as signs of his search for meaning and purpose of life. Saying this, let's see what this might mean for us as theologian, philosopher, or psychologist. So this new culture, very shortly described as culture of therapy, encourages people to be self-sufficient, authentic on one side. On the other side, they are left to be isolated as small units, automatons, in search of flourishing. So on one side, this new individual likes to rely on advances of science and psychological therapies, and at the same time, somehow is still willing to refer to the old wisdom and religion and spirituality, however, with a lot of resistance. Because he feels free from traditional structures, he feels like finally I can start breathing. There is a kind of new optimism, but this optimism in many ways is very naive. So he experiences a kind of comfort on one side, and on the other side, some anxiety as well. Now, what might be the assets for us? The first one is, in this time, post-modernity, we are supposed to choose our faith. So our faith should be somehow, once I choose it, should be based on critical reflection, discernment, somehow rooted in my personal experience. And then, unfortunately, for many people, that's enough once they say, oh, I know what I want, because they lack a kind of critical examination. I mean, they live in a kind of illusion which misses a kind of critical examination. So the choice as such is not enough. The choice somewhere, somehow needs to be proven or examined in community or interaction with other people. So the personal choice is only the beginning. It's a good beginning, but it's not sufficient. Now, the second point is we are challenged, we are invited to somehow go beyond our imagining of God. Richard Carney, a philosopher here, he talks about anatheism. So it's this ability, capacity to go beyond atheism. to allow God finally to reveal God's self in a way that this God will talk to us again. Nothing new if we refer to Meister Eckhart, who said we need a God beyond God. Or Nietzsche's claim that God is dead is a kind of invitation for us to discover a new God's true face. And the third asset might be our faith should be as such free, which means I choose it, I believe because I decided so, not because my tradition is so strong that I have nothing else to do than just following my tradition. On one side. On the other side, my faith should be freeing, which means empowering me to do what I'm really supposed to do. And God wants me to be free. So empowered by God to believe, but not forced to believe. God is still calling us. Now it's up to me how to answer this call. And the answer should be much more personal, setting me free, empowering me to become a better version of myself. Now, we are still in search of a meaningful life. And these assets, I claim, should be seriously taken in consideration as the seeds of the truth, logoi spermatikoi, as mentioned this at the beginning of my presentation. So to be more specific, existential questions related to our existence, as well as to our ongoing search for the meaning and purpose of life, remains those topics that postmodernity in itself, without any reference to spirituality, cannot answer. Postmodernity, with all it claims, is in so many ways inconsistent, which should be taken as an opportunity for a new Christian apologetics. Now, our experiences of, for example, the beginning and the end of human life, of suffering, loss, grievance, forgiveness, marriage, divorce, inner emptiness, and so on, are doubtless crucial points when human minds and hearts are looking for something meaningful and life-giving. And there is so much Christianity can offer here, even though we struggle to find a new language how to deliver our message. Thank you so much.